There is a man from Africa. Millions call him a hero. In Europe, America, and diplomatic circles, governments are watching his every move. On social media, he's become one of the continent's most talked about leaders. Some believe he could reshape Africa's future. Others believe he's repeating a dangerous pattern that has ended badly before. So, why is the entire world watching a 37-year-old army captain from one of Africa's poorest countries? Is Ibrahim Traoré the beginning of a new Africa, or simply another military ruler making promises history have heard before?
Should no longer be seen as beggars. It is us who should give to others what we have not finished consuming.
After the coup, one young army captain suddenly found himself carrying the weight of an entire nation. Captain Ibrahim Traoré was only in his mid-30s when he became Burkina Faso's new leader, making him one of the youngest heads of states in the world. For many outside Africa, his name meant very little, but inside Burkina Faso, he stepped into office at a time when patience had run out. Years of insecurity, political instability, and growing public frustration had left many citizens feeling that the old system was no longer protecting them. Burkina Faso was facing relentless attacks from armed extremist groups. Entire communities had been displaced, thousands of lives had been lost, and vast areas of the country had become increasingly difficult for the government to control. For many people, everyday life had become a struggle for safety rather than prosperity. Traoré promised something different. He said restoring security would come before everything else. Without security, he argued there could be no meaningful development, no economic progress, and no stable democracy. His message was direct, uncomplicated, and easy for many people to understand. Before a nation can grow, it must first survive. That message quickly resonated with citizens who believed previous governments had failed to confront the country's deepest challenges. To supporters, he represented a break from politics as usual, a young military officer willing to make difficult decisions where others had fallen short. But becoming president was only the beginning. History is filled with leaders who inspired hope during their first days in office, only to disappoint the people who believed in them. Around Africa and beyond, many were already asking the same question. Would Ibrahim Traoré become another leader remembered for bold promises and little change? Or could he succeed where so many governments before him had struggled? That question would soon make him one of the most closely watched leaders in the world. What transformed Ibrahim Traoré from Burkina Faso's new leader into a continental symbol wasn't simply the office he held. It was the message he carried. From the beginning, Traoré presented himself as more than a military ruler. He spoke about dignity, self-reliance, and the belief that African nations should have greater control over their own future. His speeches often focused on sovereignty, the idea that Burkina Faso should make decisions based on its own interests rather than outside pressure. For many Africans, those words sounded familiar. They echoed the vision of Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's revolutionary president during the 1980s. Sankara challenged corruption, promoted local production, encouraged national self-sufficiency, and argued that African countries should depend less on former colonial powers. Although the two men governed in very different circumstances, many supporters began drawing comparisons between them. Whether those comparisons are fully justified remains a matter of debate, but they helped shape Traore's public image across Africa. His government also pursued a foreign policy that signaled a desire to reduce dependence on France, Burkina Faso's former colonial ruler, while expanding relationships with other international partners. To supporters, these decisions represented an effort to reclaim national independence and redefine Burkina Faso's place in the world. His personal image added to that appeal. Unlike many political leaders known for lavish lifestyles, Traore was often seen wearing military fatigues instead of expensive suits. His public appearances projected discipline and simplicity rather than luxury. Combined with his youth and confident speeches, this created a powerful image that spread rapidly across social media. Soon, videos of his speech were attracting millions of views. Across Africa, young people shared clips praising his confidence and his calls for African unity and self-determination. Murals, songs, posters, and online tributes celebrated him as a new generation of African leaders. For many supporters, he represented the possibility that Africa could chart its own course without relying on outside powers. Yet, admiration alone doesn't build a nation. Powerful speeches can inspire people. Symbol can unite them. But history has repeatedly shown that lasting leadership is measured not by words or popularity, but by results. And that is exactly where the world's attention would become even more intense. Now, this brings us to the main reason why we are here. Why is the entire world watching Ibrahim Traoré? As Ibrahim Traoré settled into office, it became clearly that he wasn't simply trying to change Burkina Faso's leadership. He wanted to change the way the country was governed. For decades, Burkina Faso had held elections, changed governments, and followed many of the political models prompted by Western democracies. Yet, despite those transitions, the country's security continued to deteriorate. Armed extremist groups expanded their reach. Communities were forced from their homes, and large parts of the country remained beyond the state's effective control. To Traoré, this was proof that something fundamental wasn't working. He argued that a nation fighting its survival could not operate as though it was living in peaceful times.
When we see the parade of
According to him, restoring security had to come before politics. Without safety, he said, election alone could not bring stability, economic growth, or lasting democracy. His government suspended the activities of political parties during the transition and delayed a return to civilian rule, arguing that defeating the security threats had to take priority. Supporters saw these decisions as difficult but necessary measures. For a country at war, they believed that focusing on political competitions while much of the country remained under threat would only distract from the urgent task of protecting lives. Critics, however, viewed the situation very differently. Human rights organizations and international observers warned that concentrating power in the hands of a military government, restricting political activity, and limiting space for opposition could weaken democratic institutions and make it harder to hold leaders accountable. They argued that emergencies can justify extraordinary measures, but they can also become reasons for government to hold onto power longer than originally promised. This debate quickly spread far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Across Africa, some leaders and citizens questioned whether Western democratic models had truly delivered security and development for countries facing armed conflicts. Others insisted that abandoning democratic safeguards would create even greater problems in the future. The question was no longer just about Burkina Faso. It had become a debate about how nations should govern themselves during times of crisis. Was Ibrahim Traoré making difficult decisions that extraordinary circumstances demanded? Or was Burkina Faso beginning a path towards authoritarian rule? The answer would depend less on speeches than on one undeniable measure of success. Outside Burkina Faso, many headlines focused on France, diplomacy, and shifting international alliances. But inside the country, those issues were not the greatest concern for most ordinary citizens. The real battle was happening far from conference rooms and presidential palaces. It was unfolding in towns and villages where families lived with the constant fear of armed attacks. For years, Burkina Faso has faced violence from armed extremist groups linking to regional insurgencies. These groups have attacked civilians, targeted security forces, disrupted schools, and forced millions of people to flee their homes. Entire communities have been uprooted, leaving many families dependent on humanitarian assistance. This was the crisis Ibrahim Traoré promised to confront. His government expanded military operations and increased efforts to recruit and support civilian volunteer forces to help defend local communities. Officials argued that the country needed to mobilize all available resources if it hoped to gain control of territory and protect its people. Supporters pointed to these efforts as evidence that the government was taking decisive action against a threat previous administrations has failed to contain. They believed stronger military operations were essential if Burkina Faso was ever going to restore stability. Yet, the conflict has remained complex and costly. Independent observers have reported that while government forces have made gains in some areas, violence has continued in others. Humanitarian needs remain severe, and civilians had continued to bear much of the burden of the fighting. Measuring progress in such a conflict is difficult, and assessments often differ depending on the source and the period being examined. This is why the world's attention remains fixed on Burkina Faso, because security is the foundation upon which every other promises rests. Economic reforms means little if farmers cannot safely reach their fields. Foreign investments means little if businesses cannot operate without fear. Political change means little if families cannot live in peace. In the end, this may be the single test that defines Ibrahim Traoré's legacy, because if security cannot improve, his other promises does not matter. Now, let's get to the real matter at hand. For decades, France was Burkina Faso's closest international partner. Even after Burkina Faso gained independence in 1960, the relationship between the two countries remained deeply rooted. France continued to play an important role in West Africa through military cooperation, economic ties, development assistance, and political influence. To many Western governments, this partnership was seen as essential for regional stability. But not everyone in Burkina Faso saw it that way. Over the years, frustration began to grow among many citizens who believe that despite decades of close relations with France, insecurity had only worsened as armed extremist groups expanded across the Sahel. Many questioned why violence continued to spread despite the presence of foreign military forces. One of the most visible symbols of France's involvement was Operation Backhand, a military mission launched in 2014 to combat extremist groups across the Sahel. Thousands of French troops were deployed to countries including Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso. While the operation achieved some tactical success, it also faced growing criticism from people who felt it had failed to bring lasting peace. When Ibrahim Traoré came to power, he made it clear that Burkina Faso wanted to chart its own course. In 2023, French forces withdrew from Burkina Faso after the government ended the military agreement that had allowed them to operate in the country. Across the capital, Ouagadougou, and in other cities, anti-French demonstrations drew large crowds. Protesters carried Burkinabe flags, burned French symbols, and demanded an end to what they saw as decades of foreign influence. To Traoré supporters, this was more than a military decision. It was a declaration that Burkina Faso intended to make its own choices, even if those choices challenged long-standing international relationships. Critics, however, warned that removing an experienced military partner during an ongoing security crisis carried significant risk. They questioned whether Burkina Faso had the resources to confront extremist violence without the support it had previously received. For many observers, the question was no longer whether France's influence was changing.
It was what would replace it.
As Burkina Faso distanced itself from France, the world began paying close attention to the country's new diplomatic direction. Rather than relying primarily on traditional Western partners, Ibrahim Traoré's government sought to expand relationships with a wider range of countries. Amongst the most closely watched was Russia, which had already increased its presence in parts of Africa through military cooperations, security agreements, and political engagements. Although the nature and extent of these partnerships continued to evolve, the perception of a growing relationships between Burkina Faso and Russia became a major focus of international discussion. At the same time, Burkina Faso strengthened its ties with neighboring Mali and Niger, two countries also led by military governments. Together, they formed the Alliance of Sahel States, a regional partnership aimed at increasing cooperation on security, defense, and shared political interests. Supporters described the alliance as an African-led effort to confront common threats without relying as heavily on outside powers. The government also expressed interest in building stronger economic and diplomatic relationships with a broader range of global partners, including countries such as China, whose investments in infrastructure, mining, and trade had expanded across Africa in recent decades. To supporters, these moves represented a new kind of foreign policy, one based in diversification rather than dependence. Instead of looking primarily to one traditional ally, they argued that Burkina Faso should be free to cooperate with whichever country best served its national interests. But not everyone was convinced. Some analysts questioned whether replacing one powerful international partner with another truly represented independence. Others argued genuine sovereignty depends not only on choosing different allies, but also on building strong institutions, a resilient economy, and the capacity to make decisions without undue external influence. This is why Ibrahim Traoré continues to attract global attention. His government did not simply redefine Burkina Faso's foreign policy. It is testing a larger idea that resonates far beyond its borders. Can African nations build new partnerships while maintaining genuine independence? Long before many people around the world would point to Burkina Faso on a map, they had already seen Ibrahim Traoré online. Open TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, or X, and chances are you will find countless of videos portraying him as either Africa's greatest hope or its next strongman. His speeches are edited with dramatic music, viewed millions of times, and shared far beyond the borders of Burkina Faso. To his supporters, he has become more than a president. He has become a symbol. But there is a problem. Not everything you see online is true. As Traore's popularity has grown, so has the amount of misinformation surrounding him. AI-generated videos have been made to look authentic. Old footage is sometimes presented as new. Quotes are attributed to him without evidence. Some viral posts credit him with achievements that cannot be verified, while others spread false claims designed to discredit him. In today's digital world, emotion often travels faster than facts. To many supporters, he is exactly the kind of leader Africa has been waiting for. They see a man who speaks confidently about sovereignty, challenges long-standing foreign influence, and projects an image of discipline rather than luxury. They admired his military background, his straightforward speeches, and calls for African nations to rely more on their own people and resources. Some even see echoes of Thomas Sankara in his vision for Burkina Faso, but others remained deeply concerned. Human rights organizations and international observers have raised questions about restrictions on political activities during these transitions. Concerns over press freedom, limits on dissent, and the uncertainty surrounding how long military rule will continue. For them, the fear is not only about today's decision, but about what those decisions could mean for Burkina Faso's democratic future. These two perspectives exist side by side. History has given Africa no shortage of leaders who promised a new beginning. Many arrived with inspiring speeches. Many spoke of sovereignty, justice, and ending corruption. Many convinced their people that this time would be different. Yet, too often, hope gave way to disappointment. Public trust faded, institutions weakened, and ordinary citizens were left waiting for the change they had been promised. That is why Ibrahim Traoré's story matters far beyond the borders of Burkina Faso. The world is not watching simply because he challenges France. It is not watching because of Russia's geopolitics or viral speeches on social media. The world is watching because the real test of leadership has never been words. It is whether power is used to improve the lives of ordinary people. Can security be restored? Can the country's resources create opportunities for its citizens? Can promises become lasting institutions rather than temporary slogans? Will Ibrahim Traoré be remembered as a leader who helped transform Burkina Faso and inspired a new chapter of leadership in Africa? Or will he become another name in a long list of leaders who promised revolution but could not deliver? Well, it's only time and the choices made from this moment forward will answer that question.